The NCAA just approved a historic change in college sports, but how would it affect Notre Dame? Plus, could Marcus Freeman be on the hot seat if Notre Dame doesn't make the playoff this season? All that and more on today's Mailbag edition of Locked On Irish.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up and welcome into another edition of Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. Today is Friday, May 24th, so happy Friday, and thank you for getting your holiday weekend started right here by making this your first listen of the day. I'm your host, Tyler Wojciak. I graduated from Notre Dame in 2018, and now I am a producer at Fox Sports. As always, you can watch the full episode on YouTube, or you can listen wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching along, please give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Or if you're listening to the pod, you can help us out by rating the show 5 stars. You can even leave a nice review and subscribe there as well. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Okay, we've got a lot to get into today. It is the first mailbag I've done in a few weeks, and I've got a lot of really good questions that I'll get into in segments 2 and 3, but we have got to start with the groundbreaking decision by the NCAA and its Power 5 conferences. Notre Dame is included in that Power 5 conferences, by the way, as a member of the ACC. The parties have agreed that they are going to allow schools to pay student athletes directly. This felt inevitable, and now it's here, or at least almost here, because the first initiative in this settlement is to pay former players as part of the settlement. Then it sets the stage for a revenue share with current and future players. The NCAA was dealing with a myriad of lawsuits that had the potential to bankrupt college athletics as a whole, so they needed to settle those first, and then they could figure out a plan for the future. As for that future, at least according to ESPN, the parties involved here have agreed to a revenue-sharing plan allowing each school to share up to roughly $20 million per year with its athletes. So it's a lot to take in, right? And even though I said it felt inevitable as of recently. And when I say recently, I mean probably the past 2 or 3 years, dating back to 2021. But this was unheard of 10 years ago. Hell, even 5 years ago. The idea that schools would be paying their student athletes directly went against everything, went against the entire premise of amateurism, even though we all probably can agree that the idea of amateurism, at least as it was referred to with college sports, was a bit antiquated, to say the least. So now it's here, and the state of college football and the state of all college sports, really, which has been described as the wild, wild west, that's been the common cliche for the past several years now, ever since the dawn of NIL. This is a very significant first step into what will be the future and what I think will sort of settle things down the road. Now, there's a few years ago when Father John Jenkins and the former athletic director Jack Swarbrick wrote an op-ed in the New York Times where they said, hey, the day that student athletes become employees of the school, they're out, right? So on one hand, you might think, oh, wow, is Notre Dame out? Well, not really. Okay, here's what President Father John Jenkins had to say about this. Quote, "The settlement, though undesirable in many respects and promising only temporary stability, is necessary to avoid what would be the bankruptcy of college athletics. To save the great American institution of college sports, Congress must pass legislation that will preempt the current patchwork of state laws, establish that our athletes are not employees, but students seeking college degrees, and provide protection from further antitrust lawsuits that will allow colleges to make and enforce rules that will protect our student athletes and help ensure competitive equity among our teams," end quote. So there's a lot to take in here, right? And I understand that for some of you, all this talk about NIL and Congress and, student athletes become employees, it's not the most fun conversation to have. And I'll admit, it's not my favorite segment to have to do, but it is important. So we have to talk about it. So there's a lot of things that are still being figured out now, and it's going to continue to be an ongoing conversation over the course of the next several months and probably even several years as all these lawsuits get settled and the schools, the conferences, all the parties involved come together to work on an agreement that will sort of settle things down. Because even though this agreement is in place, that's great, but it's just a start because there's still a lot more things that everyone needs to figure out. And I think when you read that quote back from Father John Jenkins, specifically the part where he says, "The settlement, though undesirable in many respects and promising only temporary stability," it's pretty clear he's not the biggest fan of this move. And I get it, right? This does go against the idea of the student-athlete experience for Notre Dame, but it also shows a willingness to accept the current state that we're in from President Father John Jenkins and also the university, the athletic department, and all of the programs within Notre Dame. So it's an important step, and I'm glad that Notre Dame isn't fighting it. They're willing to accept it, and they are willing to embrace, as much as they can, the current state of college athletics. But I think as we recognize this, where people are going to be like, oh, I'm not going to watch anymore. Well, I don't really think that's the case because NIL started 3 years ago. It's been crazy ever since, and yet viewership across all college football has gone up. So I don't think that people are now all of a sudden are going to stop watching. Maybe you won't. Maybe you won't watch anymore. Maybe this is going to be the last show you ever listen to and that you won't watch a single Notre Dame football game this season. I doubt it. Personally, but I feel like a lot of people sort of have the same mindset of Father John Jenkins. Like, look, I don't love the situation that we're in, but this is a necessary step because what's currently going on where there's basically no rules, the NIL, the transfer portal, all of that, no one is really abiding by anything. There's no structure. They're willing to accept that, hey, this is a first step. It's not really where we want it to get to, but hopefully it'll settle things down and we'll get to a more uniform structure down the road where it's not as crazy as it is right now. So what does it really change? Well, on one hand, NIL collectives are still going to exist. I know that in the perfect world for all the schools and all the presidents involved, NIL collectives won't exist because they're the ones that are really getting down there in the mud and they're arranging these deals in the back rooms at the last second. They're causing guys to enter the transfer portal. Like, that's all still going on, and it's probably going to continue until there are more rules and regulations surrounding the NIL collective specifically. But with this rule, once it becomes in place and the schools are willing to share $20 million in revenue a year with all of their student athletes, the NIL collectives are not going to have to donate as much money every single year. And when you look at it from Notre Dame's perspective, that's a good thing, right? Because Notre Dame has shown that they are willing to spend some NIL money. That money is coming from boosters and, the fund collective, all that stuff. Like, they're getting money every single year, but the longer this goes on and the more money that's necessary to pay for all these players and to keep everyone around, that check is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And there's going to be some people who are really active right now who might not want to be as active several years down the road when they're like, hey, I'm paying all this money and it hasn't amounted to enough playoff wins, national championship, things like that. So all of a sudden the big money donors, they might not be willing to spend as much money, and then you're going to have to work to get more money from different people. This is happening with every other school in the country, by the way. But the good thing now is that if Notre Dame is willing to spend that $20 million on its student athletes, most of which is going to go to football, by the way, because it's the revenue-generating sport or the one that generates the most revenue, I don't think that the NIL collectives will carry as much of a burden to pay for everything now that the schools are involved and they're going to be able to pay people directly. So that's a good thing. It's a good thing for Notre Dame. It's a good thing for the NIL collectives that Notre Dame works with, and it's a good thing for pretty much all the other NIL collectives and boosters around the country. So even though they're still going to exist, they're still going to be a major factor. There's still going to be the haves and the have-nots. The schools with the biggest NIL collectives and the biggest money coming in are still going to have an advantage over the rest. I do think that in a few years, this will level the playing field slightly. I also think that people are still going to be mad no matter what. And I get that. I totally understand why you might not love that Notre Dame is going to be paying student athletes directly. You might think that they don't deserve it, that the scholarship is enough. That's fine. You are free to believe that, and I respect that. But personally, I think that it makes more sense for the schools to be paying them than the boosters and things like that, because it's the schools, it's the athletic departments, it's the coaches of these programs who are going to the boosters saying, hey, we need more money. We need more money. We need more money. That's being said from pretty much every coach, every athletic director from around the country. They're telling that to their boosters. And if I were a booster and I were donating all this money, I'd be like, hey, why aren't you paying for some of that? Because I see the amount of revenue that you're pulling in, and now I'm the one who's responsible for paying for this transfer guy to come into the program. Why can't you spend some of it? It's a fair argument. And I think that now that the schools will be paying student athletes directly, those things are going to even out a little bit. The boosters are still going to carry a big responsibility, but I also think that now the schools are going to be responsible for a lot of that as well. And I think that it means the boosters who are a little bit more willing, have a little bit deeper pockets, they're going to be like, all right, I'm coming in, I'm adding extra stuff on top of what the school is already willing to offer. And Notre Dame has shown that they're willing to get in this. Even though Father John Jenkins might be a little reluctant, he's basically admitting this is the way things are. This is the way that we have to act, and we are willing to play in this ballgame. So I feel like that's pretty good for the Notre Dame side of things. We all know that Notre Dame has never really been hurting for money, and I always felt like when NIL first became a thing, even though Notre Dame was a little bit slow to really, dive head first into it, I always felt like, hey, Notre Dame should have an advantage here. In the haves and the have-nots world, Notre Dame is certainly a have. I don't think anyone is debating that. So I think those are all good things from the Notre Dame perspective. And I'll also say that for as much as we, and I'm including myself in this as well, for as much as we as the college sports fan have complained about the way things are in recent years and all the drama and all the uncertainty that goes on in all the sports that we love as a whole, but specifically as it pertains to our favorite team, the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, it's really not that bad. Interest has never been higher. College football Saturdays are still the best days of the year. It's still the thing that I'm counting down to. It's just over 90 days, by the way, if you are keeping track from the season opener, which I am. And I feel like there's going to be an adjustment period to this, but it's the first time where I felt like, okay, it's crazy right now. It's going to continue to be crazy for a little bit, but it's the first time where I actually believe that things are going to settle down enough that it's a more even playing field. And if you think that ever was an even playing field, I've got news for you. You were wrong, okay? Because bags of cash have been thrown around for a really long time. And NIL made it heightened, and it took it to a whole nother level, and all of a sudden there was more money than ever being thrown around, and it was way more out in the open, and I think it was shocking to a lot of people, and I get that. I get that it turned a lot of people off, and I get that the transfer portal turns a lot of people off. But when you look at the television ratings and you look at the fan interest, specifically around Notre Dame and what they have going on this season, they've been willing to pay more money to the assistants. There was something that came out, I believe it was from Pro Football Focus, that said Mike Denbrock was the highest paid offensive coordinator in all of college football. Al Golden is getting paid a ton of money. Notre Dame is building a brand new facility that is going to cost hundreds of $millions. We know that there are several players on this team making 6 figures, 7 figures. They're getting paid a lot of money. And guess what? The excitement and the enthusiasm that this fan base has for this upcoming season, because we all know the amount of talent that's on the roster. We believe in the coaching staff. We believe in the people involved. And we're all so excited about what this team could accomplish. Are you really that concerned about NIL? Are you really that concerned about the players getting paid in this situation, knowing what's to come, knowing how exciting the season is going to be? Maybe some of you feel that way, but I don't. Okay, and I feel like these players have long deserved this kind of money because they generate a ton for the school, the university, and they're the reason why I'm doing this podcast, right? This podcast would not exist if it weren't for the players. You wouldn't be listening to this right now. You wouldn't be so focused on the team if it weren't for the players. And you know what? They bust their ass every single day in practice. They go to school. That's what we love about this whole situation with Notre Dame, is that the student athletes are, in fact, students. And yeah, it's a little bit different than everyone else. Is it a little bit harder for Notre Dame to win because of the restrictions that they place on themselves? Absolutely. But it's not impossible for them to win. And I'm really, really excited about this season, no matter what's going on, no matter how these players are getting paid. And I feel like eventually, once things settle down a little bit, everyone is going to buy in one way or another. They might be a little reluctant at first, but eventually fans are going to be bought into this. And I think that eventually this will be a great thing for college athletics. Even though it's jarring and we didn't really see it coming as of a few years ago, now it's here. Student athletes are going to be getting paid directly from Notre Dame. It's going to be weird. It's going to be different, but change is inevitable in all aspects of life, and it's happening here in college sports, and we're all just going to have to deal with it, whether we like it or not. All right, coming up next in the mailbag, could Marcus Freeman's job be in jeopardy if the Irish don't make the playoff next season? It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Okay, here's my pick tonight. So we got Mavs, Timberwolves, Game 2 of the Western Conference Finals. The Timberwolves are favored by 5. I'm rooting for the Mavs in this series. I'm going to be honest with you. I was really happy with their win in Game 1, but I do really like the Timberwolves, and I really want this series to go 7. And I feel like the Timberwolves are due for a big bounce-back game. I think that they're going to cover. So take the Timberwolves -5 tonight. I know I led you astray yesterday taking the Pacers +9. The Celtics ended up winning by 16. Let's double down tonight. Let's take T-Wolves -5. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, let's get to the mailbags, and our first one is a doozy. It comes from @A_Hackroll. If Notre Dame doesn't make the college football playoff this season, is Marcus Freeman on the hot seat? I don't want to say it's as definitive as, well, if Notre Dame doesn't make the playoffs, then, Freeman should be fired. But if Notre Dame is really disappointing this season, I think we'd all admit right now, as we sit here in late May, we'd all admit that if Notre Dame doesn't make the 12-team college football playoff this season, it would be a giant disappointment. And frankly, I would say the first 2 years, record-wise, have been a disappointment in the Marcus Freeman era. Now, granted, I would give Marcus Freeman a pass in his first season because it was his first season as head coach, and his starting quarterback got hurt and missed the rest of the regular season in the second game. But Notre Dame was losing to Marshall whether or not Tyler Buchner got hurt in that game, because by that point, the game was already over. Notre Dame was going to start that season 0-2, which was a big disappointment. They were preseason top 5 that year, which they absolutely should not have been. They were not that good, but still going, 8-4 in that first season. That was not a whole lot of fun. But again, I'll give him a pass because of what I just mentioned. He lost his starting quarterback. The losses to Stanford and Marshall were inexcusable. The losses to Ohio State and USC, a little bit more excusable. But I think we can all agree that we had higher aspirations in Marcus Freeman's first year than going 8-4. Last year, I thought that Notre Dame would have a really good shot at making the playoff. As it turns out, Sam Hartman was not as good as we thought he was. Notre Dame finished 9-3. They should have beaten Ohio State. That was a big letdown. And then they had 2 absolute duds against Louisville and Clemson. But again, there were signs of progress. Notre Dame ended up with 10 wins last season. Granted, they got that 10th win in the bowl game. Still counts. It was an improvement for Marcus Freeman in his second year. So if he maintains that trajectory, if he continues to improve in his third year as head coach, a very pivotal year for any Notre Dame football coach is that third season. And I think that if they go backwards, right, if they go 8-4 this year, all of a sudden that seat is going to start getting a little hot. I know we all love Marcus Freeman. I love Marcus Freeman, and I really, really, really want the guy to succeed at Notre Dame because he has such a great personality. He's so bought into the university for all the things that we love about the school, and we are all rooting for Marcus Freeman. We have to be honest with ourselves. If Notre Dame goes 8-4 this season, with the amount of talent on the roster and with the schedule that they have, 8-4 would be a colossal disappointment, and we would really have to start questioning Marcus Freeman and his ability to coach or to be the head coach right now. Because I'm going to be honest, I have no doubt in my mind that Marcus Freeman will at some point be an excellent head coach. I think top 10, no doubt. It's going to happen. But he's very young. He's new to the role. So there is a chance. There's a chance. I'm not saying I'm rooting for this, but it's a realistic possibility that Marcus Freeman doesn't put it all together at Notre Dame, but he's a tireless worker, and he's going to continue working, and eventually he becomes a great coach. That's a possibility. I don't think it's going to happen. I think he's going to end up becoming a great coach at Notre Dame, and he's going to lead this team back to where they want to be. But this year is pivotal, and they absolutely have to make the playoff for us to feel good about Marcus Freeman. Now, if there's some crazy things happening, like Riley Leonard and Steve Angeli both get hurt and Notre Dame deals with a ton of injuries and all kinds of crazy stuff happens, and maybe we have to give Marcus Freeman the benefit of the doubt, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But right now, when you look at this team, this is a top 5 defense in college football. They just paid $1 million plus to get one of the best quarterbacks, if not the best quarterback in the transfer portal, to be their starter. Yes, they have to break in a new offensive line, but they've got a ton of talent at running back, at wide receiver, and at tight end. I would say top to bottom, this is the most talented roster Notre Dame has had in a really, really long time, probably dating back to 2015. I know that me and Pete Sampson talked about this a couple weeks ago. This team is absolutely loaded. So if Notre Dame goes 10-2 and they just miss outside the playoff, some unfortunate things happen, Marcus Freeman is not going to be on the hot seat. Let me make that abundantly clear. If they go 9-3, I still don't think he'll be on the hot seat, but I think that there will be a portion of the fan base that will start to turn on him because the expectations are so high for this season. If Notre Dame goes 8-4 or anything worse than that, the seats are going to start getting hot. But I don't think we're going to get there. All right, I just had to answer the question, and I do feel like Notre Dame is going to make the playoff this season, and I feel like the conversation about Marcus Freeman after the season is going to be very positive, and we're all going to be very excited about the future. But it's late May. We got some content to make, so we got to talk. Marcus Freeman on the hot seat, potentially, but I don't think it's going to happen. All right, this next question comes from @TheShayDog. Does ND get into the playoffs at 10-2? I say no. This is the Shaydog talking for now. We should be compared to other teams from SEC, or we would be compared to other teams from the SEC and Big Ten that are 10-2, or compared to teams that lost in the conference championship. Any of those teams would have a better resume if we go 10-2. Do we even have a quality W? So, good question, Shaydog, and it kind of goes in line with the question I just answered previously. It's really hard to say whether Notre Dame will go whether Notre Dame will make the playoff if they go 10-2 right now, because there's so many things that we don't know. We don't know who the losses would come to. We don't know who's going to be good on Notre Dame's schedule, who's going to be disappointing, because I think even though we all can look at Notre Dame's schedule right now and say, hey, this looks pretty favorable, it doesn't look like there's any great teams on the roster. Every year, there's going to be a team or two that surprises you and is better than you expect, and there's always going to be a couple teams that are not quite as good as you expect going into the season. So when you look at Notre Dame's schedule right now, I think some candidates to be a little bit better than we might give them credit for right now: Florida State, Louisville, hell, maybe even USC. USC is probably the biggest question on the entire schedule, because who knows? Like, is Miller Moss going to be the guy? Did they finally figure out what to do on the defensive side of the ball? I still don't think they're going to be that great. I think their season win total right now on FanDuel is 7, so clearly Vegas doesn't think that they're going to be that good, although USC does have one of the toughest schedules in the country in their first season in the Big Ten. So it's really hard to tell. But I would say I do think Notre Dame would probably sneak into the playoffs if they are at 10-2. I think that they would literally be the 12th seed, and they would have to go on the road and play the 5th seed in the first round, because I think if they go 10-2, they're going to be right there on the fringe. And I feel like in the new SEC and Big Ten, there's going to be a lot of teams beating up on each other, and teams are going to go 9-3, 8-4, even though they're probably better than their record is from a talent standpoint, and they're just going up against really good competition each week. But there is a chance that Notre Dame does not make the college football playoff going 10-2, because you make a good point, Shea Dog. If they do go 10-2, who are the quality wins? I think if you were to look at the schedule right now, I think the losses that you would say, okay, if Notre Dame were to lose to Texas A&M on the road in the season opener, and then say they lose to Florida State at home in November, that's 10-2. What's your best win? Louisville? Maybe USC? Like, that's really not that great unless Louisville or USC end up surprising people this year. Or they could end up beating Texas A&M and getting a good win on the road in the season opener, and then they could have a letdown game at some point along the schedule. Maybe they lose again to Louisville early on in the season, but they're able to make up for it later and they finish strong. Like, there are just so many variables in this case that it's really hard to decipher whether or not they'd make it right now. But I just think that a double-digit Notre Dame team is probably going to get in the playoff in a 12-team format. You've got your automatic bids and things like that, but it's really tough. It's really tough to predict right now, and hopefully Notre Dame is not in those conversations. Hopefully they just go 11-1, 12-0. They get a home game in the first round of the playoffs, and we don't even have to worry about that selection show on that Sunday there after the conference championships. I think that's what we're going to be. Well, I think that's what we're going to be dealing with. All right. We got a few more questions left, and I am going to be put to the test. Am I sleeping on a potential breakout freshman? One fan thinks so. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, which makes getting playoff tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to the tip-off. And with great last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. I actually just used Gametime a couple months ago to go to a Lakers game. It wasn't a playoff game, but still, I was like, you know what? I want to go see LeBron play tonight. I looked at Gametime. Ticket prices were super cheap, and I was like, you know what? I'm going, and I had a great time. Gametiming is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase, and you can see the view from your seat on your phone before you buy. My favorite thing about Gametime, though, is the pricing shows your total cost up front, and you can buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, we got 3 more questions left, and this first one comes from @RyanFire92. I feel like a Notre Dame versus James Madison game could be great. Is this a potential matchup for the future? RyanFire92, I'm guessing you're from Virginia, which is where James Madison is located, because I'm going to be honest, and I don't mean to rain on your parade. A Notre Dame versus James Madison game would not move the needle at all for me, okay? And look, I get it. If from your perspective, assuming you're close to Virginia, maybe you even went to James Madison, you've got some ties, and you really want to see that matchup, look, man, I'm all for it for you, okay? But look, I don't care at all about James Madison. Maybe it'd be a little bit better if Curt Cignetti was still the head coach there, but now he's the head coach of Indiana, and I was watching College Game Day when they were at James Madison. It looked like an awesome time, and I saw how many people were so excited about JMU football, and that's great. Be excited. Enjoy it, but this is Notre Dame, man, all right? And there's a bunch of teams I want to see Notre Dame play. Hell, me and Luke Smith did this exercise. I think it was last week, maybe it was 2 weeks ago. We designed our perfect schedule, and the thought of Notre Dame playing James Madison did not come across my mind once. And I also don't think it came across Luke Smith's mind either. But hey, if you want it, I get it. Like, I care way more about the Louisville game than the average Notre Dame fan because I lived in Louisville. A lot of my friends are Louisville fans, and that little rivalry, at least the rivalry between me and my friends, made that game, well, actually, it sucked last year. I was going to say it was more exciting, but it was a pretty miserable experience for me. It was more miserable probably than most, but there was a lot more excitement for me for that game because the people I was around with. If Notre Dame ever played the University of Kentucky, I would be so nervous. I'd be excited. I couldn't wait for that game, but I also would be so afraid that they would lose because if they were to lose to UK in football, I would be hearing about it until the day I die, right? And I think that's what makes college sports so fun is when you get to share it with your friends, and even when they annoy you because they're not rooting for your team, they might even actively hate your team. I can say from my own experience that a lot of my friends hate Notre Dame, and it has caused a lot of tough back and forth when Notre Dame's not playing good. But hey, when they are playing good and they're beating everyone, kind of walk with your chest a little bit higher. So if Notre Dame ever plays James Madison, I will be thinking about you, Ryan Fire 92. But personally, I won't care. Okay, next one. At John Platt 7882. Why are you sleeping on Aeneas Williams? I am keeping receipts. Well, damn, John Platt 7882. I didn't think I was, to be honest with you. And this actually was a comment on YouTube from an episode I did where I ranked the position groups on Notre Dame's team from best to worst. And I put the running backs at 3. And I said that the freshmen, Keidron Young and Aeneas Williams, are really good. I just don't expect them to make much of an impact this season because Notre Dame has Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price and Jabron Payne. But we're going to be seeing a lot of Jeremiah Love and a lot of Jadarian Price this season. I just don't think we're going to be seeing a ton of Aeneas Williams back there this year because the guys in front of him are just too good. That does not mean I think that Aeneas Williams won't be a great player in the future. As a matter of fact, I do. I love that pickup. I think there's a lot of Kyron Williams to his game, which might seem like a cop-out because they're both from St. Louis. But you know what? I think that comparison is fair for these two. I think that he's got that dog in him just like Kyron Williams had. I think that what he showed in spring practice was really impressive for mid-year enrollee freshman. And I think he's got a really bright future. But when you have a room as deep as this one, like Notre Dame has at the running back position, there's really not going to be a ton of opportunities for a true freshman when you've got Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price leading the way. It kind of reminds me of last season when the whole college football world, or at least most of it, was watching Colorado TCU on Big Noon Saturday in the season opener. And Colorado shocks the world by defeating the national championship runner-up the previous season in TCU. And Dylan Edwards, who was once a Notre Dame commit, who then flipped to Colorado right before signing day, he ends up going off in that game, right? I think he scored 4 touchdowns. It was crazy, right? And at the time, you're like, man, is that the one that got away? And then you start thinking about it like, okay, Dylan Edwards is going off right now for the Colorado Buffaloes. How many carries would he get on Notre Dame? Because Notre Dame had Wojciak Esme. They also had Jeremiah Love. They also had Jadarian Price. They also had Jabron Payne. So Dylan Edwards, who was out there scoring 4 touchdowns for Colorado in their season opener, would probably not get, Jeremiah Love got 71 carries last season. I would say Dylan Edwards would probably have gotten like 60. If that most, that'd probably be generous, right? If he had played for Notre Dame this year or last year. And that's not even a knock on Dylan Edwards. It's just the room was so loaded. And that's kind of how I look at Aeneas Williams. Like, he could be a really, really talented player. There's a chance that if he went to other Power 5 or I guess Power 4 now programs around the country, he'd probably be getting a significant amount of carries. But not this year on this Notre Dame team because that room is so deep and they have 2 older and frankly better guys in front of him right now. But eventually, I think Aeneas Williams is going to be a really, really solid running back for Notre Dame. So keep those receipts, John Platt, 7882. I feel very good about Aeneas Williams. All right, last one. This one is great. At Drew, TAMU. How do you know College Station is a lousy place? Why do you think that? So I think this one might be directed at me, or I think it could more likely directed at Luke Smith, my good friend, old co-host, who was on the show and caused quite the stir on YouTube with his not super friendly words about College Station, and I can tell you a lot of Texas A&M's fans found the video, and they were not pleased with Luke's review of College Station, even though he admitted he had never even been there, and it was more so based off reputation. So look, Drew, I'm sorry. I just think that College Station does not have the best reputation of college towns. But my favorite thing in all of this was seeing some of the Texas A&M fans being like, oh, well, College Station is a paradise compared to South Bend. And like, these guys think that South Bend is great compared to College Station. Like, what are they thinking? Let's be clear. And I'm not saying that these Texas A&M fans should like go back and listen to all my past episodes. I think it's pretty well known now that I'm not the biggest fan of South Bend, to say the least. I understand it has its flaws. I love Notre Dame. I love the campus. I loved my time there. It was, some of the best years of my life being a student at Notre Dame and living in South Bend for the time that I did. I had a great time, but I don't live in South Bend. I don't think I'll live in South Bend anytime soon. Never say never. But the funniest thing was thinking that we held South Bend on some pedestal and that College Station couldn't touch it. No, man, we'll criticize anything, right? We'll say how we feel. And I'm sorry, Drew TAMU, you're probably not listening to this because there's not going to be Texas A&M in the headline, but I did want to address it. I thought it was a lot of fun. I can't wait for the next time Luke Smith comes back on this podcast. He's probably listening to this right now, and he's probably getting a laugh out of all of this because I know that we were texting back and forth, and it's all good fun, man. Like, we have a lot of fun doing this, and yeah, sure, we're gonna trash talk different cities, different college programs. That's like all the fun of college sports, and it goes back to what I was talking about in the open. Like, yeah, we're going to trash talk Texas A&M and the lead up to the game and all that, even though I have a ton of respect for Mike Elko and what he's going to be building over there. And I feel like Kyle Field is an elite college football atmosphere. I don't know if I'm going to be able to go to that game, but, I hope I get to go and experience that and all that because I'm sure it's top notch and it's going to be one hell of a night in late August. But sometimes the back and forth, the rivalries, the bickering and all that is what makes college sports great. And to tie it all back together with the open. It doesn't matter who's getting paid NIL. It doesn't matter about the transfer portal and all that. As long as that exists, as long as the fans can bond together and argue back and forth with other fans, as long as that's going on, college sports is going to be in a good place. I feel really good about it. And again, I apologize to Drew. I apologize to the Texas A&M fans who did not like what we had to say about College Station. But you know what? I know Luke's going to be there. Maybe I'll get there, and then maybe that'll change our mind about College Station. But you're right. Maybe we can't judge a book by its cover. We're going to go have to see it for ourselves. But that is going to do it for me today. And that is another week of Locked On Irish in the books. Thanks again for making this your first listen of the day. I'm going to be back next Tuesday, the morning after Memorial Day. I hope you guys enjoy the long weekend. Hopefully you get to spend some time by the pool or the beach in the nice weather. Maybe enjoy a few adult beverages while you're at it. You deserve it. In the meantime, please subscribe on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, and I will see you on Tuesday. Have a great weekend, everybody.